Hi, welcome to Caring for New Hampshire. I'm Elaine Driscoll, State Director for Concerned Women for America, New Hampshire, and this show is a ministry of Concerned Women for America. Welcome, and we're so glad that you're here with us again. And we're going to continue a conversation that we were having with Representative Dan Itse, who is our state constitutional expert, and we're so thrilled to have him here to continue educating us on how important it is that we, the people, continue to study and educate ourselves on our state constitution, and it's vital in order for our government to continue to be able to be successful, and that all the branches of government work in harmony with each other as we understand how they're supposed to work. So welcome, Representative Itse. Welcome back. We're so glad you are here again.
Thrilled to be here.
We finished our conversation on Resolution H.R. 13, which was the legislature repudiating the Supreme Court of New Hampshire opinion that the legislature's directive to the Attorney General to enter into the lawsuit over the health care bill. The Attorney General said that he would not enter into that, even though you had given them a directive to do that, and wasn't something that he was supposed to have an opinion on. So we talked about that and went through all of that, and now we're going to talk about an amendment, and I believe you're sponsoring this amendment, and this is CACR 8, which has to do with keeping education local here in New Hampshire.
That is the primary focus. But before we go into that,
sure,
I wanted to take a moment to tell the people of New Hampshire, your viewers, a little bit about their Constitution.
Yes, please do.
It's very important because, in fact, the Constitution of New Hampshire has a voter's guide in it. It is Part 1, Article 38. Well, first of all, it's important to understand that it was never intended that interpretation of the Constitution would be left up to the judiciary. It was intended to be left up to the people of New Hampshire. And Article 38 is a directive to the people of New Hampshire, and I'm going to define two words before I begin. The first is to recur, which means to read, study, and discuss. The second is the word ought, which in philosophy is the moral imperative, that which must be done. So Article 38 says, a frequent recurrence to the fundamental principles of the Constitution and a constant adherence to justice, moderation, temperance, industry, and frugality, and all the social virtues are indispensably necessary to preserve the blessings of liberty and good government. Now, it doesn't say it's a good idea, it's convenient, indispensably necessary. The people ought, therefore, to have a particular regard to all those principles in the choice of their officers and representatives. And that's your voter's guide.
Exactly.
You're supposed to put people into Concord who exemplify, who know their Constitution, and who exemplify justice, moderation, temperance, industry, frugality, and all the social virtues. And they, that's the people, they have a right to require of their lawgivers, legislators, and magistrates, all the other functionaries in government, an exact and constant observance of them, the fundamental principles of government, in the formation and execution of the laws necessary for the good administration of government. So you, the people, are the ones who have the proper authority to interpret the Constitution and make sure that legislators like myself and the functionaries of government, the magistrates, are always adhering to your rules for the government of New Hampshire.
Yes.
And this is doubly important when you're considering a constitutional amendment. The legislature has no power to amend the Constitution. The judiciary has no power to amend the Constitution. The executive, of course, has no power to amend the Constitution. That's left up to you, the people, which means you have to understand what you're doing, right? It is your document, it is your tool for making sure that we stay within the confines that you set forth. And that's fundamentally important. Now, we've been quibbling, by our perception, for the last 20 years over school funding. Important thing to remember is that this is not a new discussion. I have a copy of an Election Day sermon from 1786, and what you have to realize, back in the day, in the early years of our republic, on the day that the legislators got sworn in, some minister would come in and offer an Election Day sermon, admonish the legislators for how they ought to govern. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that this wasn't your half-hour Sunday sermon. I mean, this was a 4-hour sermon. One of the things that this particular minister admonished the legislature was to make sure that they properly took care of public education. So this is a discussion. How education ought to be funded and provided for is a discussion that has been going on since the day we started. And I don't think we're going to end that discussion anytime soon. But we do have some serious issues in the state of our Constitution as it regards to education. Originally, the Constitution of New Hampshire, Part 1, Article 6, empowered the legislature to authorize, create, and regulate schools for public instruction. And they actually referred to as public instruction in religion, morality, and piety. But it was the general authorization for public schools, because those schools also taught reading, writing, and arithmetic. And in fact, that was put into force in 1784. Our 1785 or 86 laws, education laws, said that the schools were going to teach reading, grammar, arithmetic, Greek, and Latin. So the state always had a hand in the scope of education. I, like you, am a homeschooler, was a homeschooler. So we have an appreciation for when you're talking about teaching, you have scope and sequence, which is all the subjects you're going to teach,
right,
and the order in which you're going to progress, mm-hmm. and curriculum, which is what books you're going to use, the particular items that you're going to teach, all those, the day-to-day nitty-gritty. Mm-hmm. So the state always had a hand in the scope of education. What they never touched was the curriculum, because the towns had the exclusive right of hiring their own teachers, or as they phrase it, electing their own teachers. And in those days, whom you chose for your one-room schoolhouse was the equivalent of choosing your curriculum. And nobody outside of the parents of those children, or if they were so organized as to elect a school board, had any say in what the curriculum was going to be, what textbooks they were going to use, etc.
Really? So that was all decided by the teacher?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
So one of the objectives, or a couple of the objectives of my proposed constitutional amendment is to reestablish the legislature's empowerment to authorize schools, and secondly, to make sure that the choice of curriculum stays local. Okay.
And just to help speed this along a little bit, the reason that we need to do that is because we have recently had our governor sign us on to federal programs which would take away completely local control.
Right, and we do not want to allow that to happen.
And we don't want to allow that to happen. So it's important that we have this amendment so that we can reestablish that the control for schools remains in our state at the local level.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those, it was erased inadvertently, I believe. I mean, mm-hmm. I'd hate to think it was other than inadvertently, in 1966. Bad year.
Yeah, it was a bad year.
Actually, the other amendment was a good amendment, but it's been wrongly interpreted. But in this case, in those days, when a constitutional amendment was put before the people, they didn't have to show the people the amendment. That's been changed in the last 10
That's
years.
very interesting.
Or 20 years. So now we have to see the amendment. There were a couple of things. The Constitution required that the purpose of education was to first and foremost teach the fundamental principles of the Constitution, which they phrased as evangelical principles, bottom-up government.
Right.
And by 1966, that understanding of that word in that application had been lost. And so it was interpreted to be sectarian rather than something greater than that. So I reinsert fundamental principles of the Constitution. Also, there is at the tail end. We've been fighting over exactly what freedom the legislature has in how it's going to fund education.
Yes,
and who
that has been a big one.
And who pays for education first? In insurance parlance, who's the first payer? The Supreme Court has decided that because of the word cherish in Part 2, that the legislature is the first payer. On the other hand, if you look at the Constitution as it was at the time cherish was put in the Constitution, day one, the towns had the exclusive requirement to pay for education. So cherish really can't be construed to mean the state pays.
Okay.
So what I propose to do is again make the towns the first payer, because they're going to have control of the curriculum. They get to choose how they're going to fund it and all that kind of thing.
Okay.
How they're going to pay for the curriculum. And make it clear that the legislature has the power to how much they're going to fund education and how they're going to distribute that money in the manner that the legislature feels is best for the health of the state. Then you elect the person who's going to fight for the position that you want, rather than leaving it to somebody that you have no control over.
Would that be judges?
That would be judges, right. I mean, but that finally leaves the funding of education completely
at the town level.
Well, in the hands of the people, whether they're choosing at the school board, school district level how much they're going to fund, or they're voting for a legislator that is going to vote on their behalf as to how much the state is going to fund.